paralysis, and death. But even in small doses it can be fatal. It may lead to bees forgetting how to navigate the world. So bees fly into the wild, get lost and die alone, separated from their hives. If this happens often enough, a hive can lose its ability to sustain itself. We know that neonicotinoids are harmful to bees and that we urgently need an alternative to it. But there are billions of dollars to be made in delaying this. Studies sponsored by the chemical industry magically appear to prove a much lower toxicity to bees compared to those produced by independent scientists. There are even more factors contributing to the demise of bees, like too much genetic uniformity, crop monocultures, poor nutrition due to overcrowding, stress because of human activities, and other pesticides. Each of those factors on its own is a major problem for bees, but together they probably account for colony collapse disorder. With parasites upping their game in recent decades, the honeybees are now fighting for survival. It would be a catastrophe if they lost this fight. This is a conundrum we have to solve if we want to continue living with a relative abundance and diversity of food. Humanity is deeply interconnected with Earth and the other life forms on it. Even if we pretend that we're not, we have to take better care of our surroundings. If not to preserve the beauty of nature, then at least to ensure our own survival. This video is supported by the Australian Academy of Science, which promotes and supports excellence in science. See more at nova.org.au. It was a blast to work with them, so go check out their site. Our videos are also made possible by your support on patreon.com. Recently we passed an important milestone, which is why there will be an additional video in July. If you want to support us and become part of the Kurzgesagt Bird Army, check out our Patreon page. One of the greatest illusions in life is continuity. 66 million years ago, the continuity of the dinosaurs had been going on for around 165 million years already, and it didn't seem this would change anytime soon. The world was warm and pleasant, and most of the land was covered with lush forests and an incredible diversity of trees, flowers, ferns, and trillions of critters. Dinosaurs were ubiquitous and had diversified into hundreds of species of all shapes and sizes. Titanosaurs, large, gentle giants, shared the world with famous beasts like Tyrannosaurus rex or Edmontosaurus. Pectinodon hunted in the undergrowth, while Edmontosaurus wandered coastlines and swamps. An ancient paradise, a world of plenty, full of life. 66 million years ago, maybe on a Tuesday afternoon, life was the same as it had been the day before, or 1,000 years before, or pretty much a million years before. Things were good for our feathered dinosaur buddies, until a tiny, tiny detail in the sky changed. If there were dinosaurs watching the stars, one night they may have noticed the appearance of a new star, a tiny dot that for many weeks slowly became bigger and brighter. Until one fateful day, it looked like another small moon in the night sky. And then it faded from sight as it dipped into Earth's shadow. For a few more hours, the illusion of continuity was upheld, until it was not anymore. In the morning, the object suddenly appears again, now almost as large as the sun in the sky and growing every moment, heading for the coast near the Yucatan Peninsula. It takes the asteroid only seconds to pass through the thin layer between space and the ground to make contact, as it enters the atmosphere at almost 60 times the speed of sound. Let's stop time. Here, we see the unnamed asteroid about to commit specieside. Larger than Mount Everest, it reaches from the ocean high into the atmosphere, higher than passenger planes would fly millions of years later. At this moment, the world was one way. In a fraction of a second, it will be fundamentally different. Let's make the transition. As the asteroid hits the shallow ocean and the bedrock below, the energy of billions of nuclear weapons is released all at once as the asteroid vaporizes. A flash of light illuminates the sky as an eerie, bright white sphere grows over the Gulf of Mexico. bedrock melts into seething hot plasma at tens of thousands of degrees Celsius. The thermal radiation from the explosion travels at the speed of light and immediately burns everything within a radius of about 1,500 kilometers, while the energy from the impact pushes so hard against Earth's crust that it loses all strength and flows away from the impact site like a liquid, creating a hole 25 kilometers deep and 100 kilometers wide. The ocean is pushed back for hundreds of kilometers, like when a kid jumps into a puddle. As the crust bounces back, melted and flowing crust forms a temporary mountain stretching 10 kilometers into the sky. An incredible amount of material is blasted into the higher atmosphere, or even out into space, as much as 60 times the original mass of the asteroid. The violence of the strike is felt everywhere on Earth within minutes. A magnitude 11 earthquake may be the most powerful quake any living thing has ever witnessed in billions of years. It is so insanely strong that in India it might have shaken gigantic lava fields and causes volcanic eruptions that would last for 30,000 years and cover half of the Indian subcontinent with lava. Even on the side of Earth opposite the impact, the ground still moved by several meters. Nobody would sleep through this day. The gigantic explosion crashes against the atmosphere with unprecedented violence and causes a shockwave that reaches speeds of more than 1,000 kilometers per hour near the site of impact, similar to the hyperhurricanes on gas giants like Neptune. In Middle America, basically any soil, vegetation or animal is just shredded into pieces and catapulted thousands of kilometers away. Now, previously displaced oceans return. As the temporary mountain at the site of impact collapses, a ring of tsunamis as high as 1 kilometer, enough to cover all skyscrapers humans would ever build, heads in all directions. As they crash into the coasts of the continents surrounding the impact, they will drown thousands of kilometers of coastline. 15 hours later, some of the waves that get refracted around South America will still tower as much as 100 meters into the sky. But we still haven't talked about the worst thing yet. A lot of the debris yeeted into space will orbit Earth for thousands of years. Some may hit the Moon or even Mars. But most of it comes right back. When things fall through the atmosphere at such speeds, they get very hot, as in hundreds of degrees hot. And this happens to millions of tons of material everywhere. This rapidly heats up the atmosphere to insane temperatures. We don't know exactly how hot it got or how long this heat shock lasted, but there are two ideas here. Either the air was heated to hundreds of degrees for a few minutes, or to thousands of degrees for around 1 minute. In any case, the air became as hot as the inside of an industrial oven. How bad the global effects of this were is contested, but if enough heat reached the surface, a lot of plants and animals would have died very quickly if they couldn't bury themselves or escape into caves. The heat, together with raining debris, also may have ignited material on forest floors and sparked wildfires as the Earth rotated under the searing hot plume. In a few hours, massive wildfires were probably burning around the globe. Some of them may have lasted for months and turned Earth into a horrifying, hot, hellish version of itself. As the day of the impact draws to an end, many of the dinosaurs are already dead, but the worst is still to come. The gigantic plume of vaporized material reaches the upper atmosphere and spreads around the whole globe. Together with the soot from the burning planet and the aerosols generated at impact, the planet sinks into a deep darkness, with only the remaining raging fires illuminating the scenery. Whatever plants survived the firestorms will now be starved for sunlight as global photosynthesis is temporarily shut down. Within days, temperatures crash as much as 25 degrees Celsius. The oceans were especially hard hit. The lack of sunlight killed over 90% of plankton, which formed the basis of the food web of marine life. Ultimately, this would kill off the large marine reptiles and ammonites that used to dominate the seas. The biosphere that survivors now find themselves in is like an alien landscape. Ash, debris, and the blurred remains of the formerly lush and blooming life cover the ground. The sky is dark and it's cold, and fresh food is scarce, while fungi thrive. For months and years, the planet will be a hostile and deadly place. The sudden global winter will last for decades. At least 75% of all species on Earth will just vanish from existence. And so, as the day ends, the world is suddenly different. The continuity that went on for millions of years is no more. The era of the dinosaurs is over, just like that. Eventually, from the ashes of the old world, survivors emerged. Birds that are the direct descendants of the dinosaurs and mammals that would eventually become the dominant animals on the planet. Without the asteroid, who knows what life on Earth would look like today? Without the sudden disruption of dinosaur continuity that completely changed the planet and all life on it, we might have never had the opportunity to become what we are today. It's not clear how long the human era will last. So far, modern humans have been around for 0.1% of the time the dinosaurs were. And in this short amount of time, we've achieved impressive feats, from making the world our own to reaching space and splitting the atom. Yet, our future and our long-term survival are not a given. If we're not careful, it could end in an instant, like the age of the dinosaurs ended. But in contrast to them, we know that our continuity is fragile, even if it doesn't feel like it. We can be prepared and be vigilant and hopeful. If we're lucky, our journey will go on for a long, long time. Speaking of journeys, we want to address something in the spirit of transparency. Kurzgesagt has changed in the last 2 years. We've become more than a YouTube channel or animation studio, and now also run a paper shop that sells hundreds of thousands of calendars, posters, and notebooks. That's not a happy accident. Many of us have a background in graphic design. Paper products are our roots, and we actually started out creating posters, books, and print infographics. We love that you can touch them, smell them, learn about small details and printing techniques. Just like the channel, we started small and without great ambition. Step by step, we found the right printers and papers, learned about shipping, and expanded our shop. We put a huge amount of research, love, and hours into it because this is the only way we know how to do things. We don't just want to make generic merch, we want to make things that fit our mission of making science exciting and creating beautiful things. Things that persist and are made with high quality and love. Our shop gives us another outlet to do this, and as a nice side effect, has turned into our main source of income for everything we do on this channel, which also keeps us independent and our videos free for everyone. So, we want to build further on that and create more things that last. We've just started a new notebook line called Pocket Log that we'll expand on in the future. The first edition is a dinosaur-themed collection that will hopefully serve a future paleontologist well. There are loads of plans for sciencey stuff, more journals and calendars and infographics. Let us know what you would like us to make for your room, kids, classrooms, and yourself. In the end, the things we do work because you like them, and because you enable us to put thousands of hours into videos and hundreds of hours into posters and journals. Thank you so much for that. We're looking forward to making fun, sciencey stuff for you, no matter if it's a video, a poster, or something else entirely. Thank you for watching. Supernovae are the most powerful explosions in the universe, unleashing enough energy to outshine galaxies. We have no real metaphor for their power. If the sun were to magically go supernova, it would feel like you were being hit by the energy of a nuclear explosion every second for weeks. While supernovae are the engines of creation, forging the elements that enable life, they also burn sterile whole regions of galaxies. So what would happen if one hit Earth? There are, roughly speaking, two ways to make a supernova. Either the core of a massive star implodes, or, less common, a white dwarf gains mass to the point where it ignites explosive nuclear fusion. The outcome is the same, a supernova explosion. When we think of an explosion on Earth, we think of something that happens fast and ends. But a supernova is more like a volcanic eruption followed by a tsunami. At first, there's a colourful ball of hot, expanding gas, creating a spectacular cloud that will shine for about a month. But then, it doesn't stop. Hot and dangerous gas rushes outwards at speeds of 10,000 kilometers a second through the near vacuum of space, sweeping up the sparse gas of the galaxy. This wall of gas expands for tens of thousands of years and will eventually span up to dozens of light years until it finally cools off and disperses its substance back into the galaxy. So what if this star tsunami hits us? Well, the damage depends on how far away it is. Stage 1, thousands of light years away. Humans have witnessed dozens of supernovae, but all of them are thousands of light years away. They appear as new stars, some outshining the moon, twinkling for a few weeks, and disappearing. Aside from looking very pretty at this distance, they don't do much to us. Stage 2, 300 light years away. Things begin to get a bit icky once a supernova occurs around 300 light years away. We can expect one this close to us every few million years. A single star giving the night sky an eerie glow like twilight. And while this is far enough away and dim enough to not do harm to us, they can affect the Earth. At these distances, it's only being hit by the last weak waves of the star tsunami. Not strong enough to do real damage, but still noticeable. In fact, we know that over the past 10 million years, multiple supernovae have struck Earth from these distances because we can find radioactive isotopes of iron deep in the rocks and sediments at the bottom of the ocean. Amazingly, these supernovae around the solar system have cleared a 1,000 light-year wide pocket of space that's called the local bubble. They blew away the interstellar gas and dust, creating a lumpy wall of gas that's now a cradle for star formation. Stage 3, 150 light years away. Once a supernova happens much closer than 300 light years, we're approaching the zone where it does real damage. Stars have extremely powerful magnetic fields. When they die, the tsunami of dead stars actually retains a lot of this magnetic energy woven through the shockwave that expands outwards. In this highly magnetized cloud, we get conditions like in a huge particle accelerator that's accelerating charged particles like protons, nuclei, and electrons to immense speeds. Which means we have an expanding cloud that is shooting deadly radiation in all directions long after the bright light from the initial explosion has faded away. If a supernova happens too close by, waves of these cosmic rays will wash over the solar system for thousands of years. While we're mostly protected on Earth's surface by the atmosphere and ozone layer, the influx of extra radiation will still increase cancer and mutation rates. Not enough to cause a mass extinction, but it will be noticeable. Spaceflight would become impossible in the solar system as astronauts wouldn't survive the waves of radiation for long. We don't know exactly how bad this would be, but a supernova that is close enough may trap our species on Earth for generations, maybe thousands of years. It only gets worse from here. Stage 4, closer than 100 light years. Within 100 light years, things get bad, as a supernova disrupts our climate in ways that we don't fully understand yet. There are a few unpleasant things happening all one after another. First, the high-energy photons arrive from the explosion, followed by many decades of radiation from the radioactive tsunami, both of which seriously damage the ozone layer, Earth's shield against harmful radiation. The ozone layer absorbs ultraviolet radiation by breaking apart ozone, O3, into O2 and a free oxygen atom, which later reforms back into another ozone molecule. But the supernova radiation breaks up nitrogen molecules that gobble up the free oxygen, breaking the cycle and depleting the ozone layer quickly. Without a radiation shield, everybody living on the surface is exposed to very high levels of UV radiation from our sun. Cancer rates would skyrocket, and just going outside during the day could be life-threatening. The extra radiation will also kill a lot, if not most, of the plankton in the oceans that live near the surface and are the basis for the marine food chains, leading to a mass extinction. Worse still, supernova radiation would ionize gas in the atmosphere, which means that it would punch through molecules and knock electrons off nuclei, leaving them charged. These charged nuclei then act as seeds for water vapor to gather and form massive global clouds. In the worst case, they would reflect enough sunlight to trigger an ice age. In fact, it's thought that the ice age 2.5 million years ago was caused by a supernova. Some scientists even think that a supernova about 60 light years away might have been the cause of the Devonian mass extinction 350 million years ago. But wait, there's more. The electrons punched free by the radiation form enormous electric avalanches, or in other words, lightning. Earth is hit by some of the worst thunderstorms in millions of years. The intense lightning causes global wildfires that consume forests and crops, devastate cities, disrupt our electrical grids and global supply chains, all while a decimated ozone layer leaks deadly radiation. While in the past the ecosystem may have bounced back from a nearby supernova after a few thousand or million years, there's no guarantee modern civilization can take a hit of this magnitude. We would face food shortages, skyrocketing prices, and wars as nations struggle to not be consumed by chaos. So a supernova this close will at the very least do significant damage for hundreds or thousands of years, if not end our modern civilization, and with it millions or even billions of lives. Still, humanity would likely survive and could recover. Stage 5, closer than 25 light years. A supernova closer than 25 light years means that we're in its kill radius, where a mass extinction is all but guaranteed. Probably about half of the ozone layer would be destroyed, and massive climactic disruption on a scale we've never witnessed would ravage Earth. Entire ecosystems would swiftly be wiped out by radiation as global wildfires envelop the planet. All the things described before happen, but way more intensely and much faster. A few people might survive for years in bunkers if they have food supplies, but the world they return to will be devastated and hostile to life for hundreds of thousands of years. Human extinction is extremely likely. The final stage, 4 light years. Being any closer to a supernova is very unlikely because space is big, but the effects would be extreme. Even from 4 light years away, the distance to Alpha Centauri, a supernova would be almost as bright as the sun in the sky. While casting 2 shadows can be fun for a few hours, within days the Earth's surface gets as hot as a sauna, making the surface for weeks until the explosion fades. The surface of Earth burns, scoured of life. Even the oceans aren't safe. The massive amount of radiation that follows burns away the ozone layer, killing everything that sees sunlight. It would be the largest extinction event in history, reducing life to a few survivors in the deep sea and critters in the deep soil. Life basically has to start over. Conclusion. How worried do you need to be? So, should you worry? No. Fortunately, there are only a handful of stars that may explode within 1,000 light years of Earth, and none are close enough to be a serious threat. Even better, these stars will probably not go supernova for many millions of years. So you are safe. But there's no guarantee for the far future. As stars orbit the galaxy, our descendants may find themselves dangerously close to a supernova. But by then, a far more advanced and wiser humanity will hopefully be able to just move out of the way. In any case, you can sleep well tonight, under the beautiful night sky. And if you dream about understanding the physics behind this video and others, we've created a series of lessons to build your understanding of fundamental science. Made in collaboration with our friends at Brilliant, these lessons dive deeper into topics from our most popular videos, including things like cosmology, biology, and even climate science. Brilliant is an interactive learning tool that makes science accessible with a hands-on approach. Because we know that to really learn something, you've got to do it. Think of each lesson as a one-on-one tutoring version of a Kurzgesagt video. In our latest lesson, you'll journey further into the conditions that can trigger a supernova and how to determine the impact of one on a planet like ours. Brilliant has thousands of lessons to explore, from maths-based topics like algebra and probability to the concepts behind machine learning and quantum computing. And with new lessons added each month, including ones from Kurzgesagt, you'll always find something fascinating to learn. To get hands-on with Kurzgesagt lessons now, go to brilliant.org/nutshell and sign up for free. And with a free trial of Brilliant Premium, you can explore everything Brilliant has to offer. There's even an extra perk for Kurzgesagt viewers. The first 200 people to use the link get 20% off their annual membership, which unlocks all of Brilliant's courses in maths, science, and computer science. We'd love to go above and beyond with our research. Brilliant will be the catalyst to expand the limits of your knowledge. There are still a few copies left of our 12,023 Human Calendar. Get it now for a whole year of joy.
The following is a conversation with Brett Weinstein, evolutionary biologist, author, co-host of the Dark Horse podcast, and, as he says, reluctant radical. Even though we've never met or spoken before this, we both felt like we've been friends for a long time. I don't agree on everything with Brett, but I'm sure as hell happy he exists in this weird and wonderful world of ours. Quick mention of our sponsors: Jordan Harbinger Show, ExpressVPN, Magic Spoon, and Force-O-Matic. Check them out in the description to support this podcast. As a side note, let me say a few words about COVID-19 and about science broadly. I think science is beautiful and powerful. It is the striving of the human mind to understand and to solve the problems of the world. But as an institution, it is susceptible to the flaws of human nature, to fear, to greed, power, and ego. 2020 is a story of all of these that has both scientific triumph and tragedy. We needed great leaders, but we didn't get them. What we needed is leaders who communicate in an honest, transparent, and authentic way about the uncertainty of what we know and the large-scale scientific efforts to reduce that uncertainty and to develop solutions. I believe there are several candidates for solutions that could have all saved hundreds of billions of dollars and lessened or eliminated the suffering of millions of people. Let me mention 5 of the categories of solutions: masks, at-home testing, anonymized contact tracing, antiviral drugs, and vaccines. Within each of these categories, institutional leaders should have constantly asked and answered publicly, honestly, the following 3 questions. 1, what data do we have on the solution, and what studies are we running to get more and better data? 2, given the current data and uncertainty, how effective and how safe is the solution? 3, what is the timeline and cost involved with mass manufacturing and distribution of the solution? In the service of these questions, no voices should have been silenced, no ideas left off the table. Open data, open science, open, honest scientific communication and debate is the way, not censorship. There are a lot of ideas out there that are bad, wrong, dangerous. The moment we have the hubris to say we know which ideas those are is the moment we lose our ability to find the truth, to find solutions, the very things that make science beautiful and powerful, in the face of all the dangers that threaten the well-being and the existence of humans on Earth. This conversation with Brett is less about the ideas we talk about. We agree on some, disagree on others. It is much more about the very freedom to talk, to think, to share ideas. This freedom is our only hope. Brett should never have been censored. I asked Brett to do this podcast to show solidarity and to show that I have hope for science and for humanity. This is the Lex Friedman podcast. Here's my conversation. Brett Weinstein. What to you is beautiful about the study of biology? The science, the engineering, the philosophy of it?
It's a very interesting question. I must say, at one level, it's not a conscious thing. I can say a lot about why, as an adult, I find biology compelling, but as a kid, I was completely fascinated with animals. I loved watching them and thinking about why they did what they did, and that developed into a very conscious passion as an adult that I think in the same way that one is drawn to a person, I was drawn to the never-ending series of near miracles that exists across biological nature.
When you see a living organism, do you see it from an evolutionary biology perspective of like this entire thing that moves around in this world, or do you see like from an engineering perspective that are like first principles almost down to the physics, like the little components that build up hierarchies, that you have cells, the first proteins and cells and organs and all that kind of stuff. So do you see low level, or do you see high level?
Well, the human mind is a strange thing, and I think it's probably a bit like a time-sharing machine in which I have different modules. We don't know enough about biology for them to connect, right? So they exist in isolation, and I'm always aware that they do connect, but I basically have to step into a module in order to see the evolutionary dynamics of the creature and the lineage that it belongs to. I have to step into a different module to think of that lineage over a very long time scale, a different module still to understand what the mechanisms inside would have to look like to account for what we can see from the outside. And I think that probably sounds really complicated, but one of the things about being involved in a topic like biology and doing so for really none of just my adult life, my whole life, is that it becomes second nature. And, when we see somebody do an amazing parkour routine or something like that, we think about what they must be doing in order to accomplish that. But of course, what they are doing is tapping into some kind of zone, right? They're in a zone in which they are in such command of their center of gravity, for example, that they know how to hurl it around the landscape so that they always land on their feet. And I would just say, for anyone who hasn't found a topic on which they can develop that kind of facility, it is absolutely worthwhile. It's really something that human beings are capable of doing across a wide range of topics, many things our ancestors didn't even have access to. And that flexibility of humans, that ability to repurpose our machinery for topics that are novel, means really the world is your oyster. You can figure out what your passion is, and then figure out all of the angles that one would have to pursue to really deeply understand it. And it is well worth having at least one topic like that.
You mean embracing the full adaptability of both the body and the mind? So like, is I don't know what to attribute the parkour to, like biomechanics of how our bodies can move, or is it the mind? Like how much percent-wise is it the entirety of the hierarchies of biology that we've been talking about, or is it just all the mind?
The way to think about creatures is that every creature is two things simultaneously. A creature is a machine of sorts, right? It's not a machine in the, I call it an aqueous machine, right? And it's run by an aqueous computer, right? So it's not identical to our technological machines. But every creature is both a machine that does things in the world sufficient to accumulate enough resources to continue surviving, to reproduce. It is also a potential. So each creature is potentially, for example, the most recent common ancestor of some future clade creatures that will look very different from it. And if a creature is very, very good at being a creature, but not very good in terms of the potential it has going forward, then that lineage will not last very long in the future, because change will throw challenges that its descendants will not be able to meet. So the thing about humans is we are a generalist platform, and we have the ability to swap out our software to exist in many, many different nations. And I was once doing an interview with this British group of parkour experts who were being they were discussing what it is they do and how it works, and what they essentially said is that you are tapping into deep monkeys. And I thought, yeah, that's about right. And anybody who is proficient in something like skiing or skateboarding has the experience of flying down the hill on skis, for example, bouncing from the top of one mogul to the next. And if you really pay attention, you discover that your conscious mind is actually a spectator. It's there. very rapidly. And, you know, I will be shocked if the exact thing doesn't exist in robotics. You know, if you program a robot to deal with circumstances that were novel to it, how would you do it? It would have to look something like this.
There's a certain kind of magic. You're right, with consciousness being an observer. You play guitar, for example, or piano for me, music. When you get truly lost in it, I don't know what the heck is responsible for the flow of the music, the kind of loudness of the music going up and down, the timing, the intricate, like even mistakes, all those things. That doesn't seem to be the conscious mind. It is just observing, and yet it's somehow physically involved.
Yeah?
More of physical parkour. Dance is like that too.
You what?
Tango dancing.
You did?
Lose yourself in it.
Shut up.
Then
How much did you sell it for?
observer, and how the hell
How much?
do that? And not only that, it's the physical motion, it's also creating the emotion.
Good job.
Like,
Was it your friend you let try a sample yesterday? Wow, so it worked.
so, but then that's
Ha!
also really connected to the
You gotta tell granddaddy.
the work. I don't know how difficult it is to replicate that. We were talking offline about Boston Dynamics robots. They've recently they did both parkour, they did flips, they've also done some dancing. And it's something I think a lot about because most people don't realize because they don't look deep enough is those robots are hard coded to do those things. The robots didn't figure it out by themselves. And yet the fundamental aspect of what it needs to be human is that process of figuring out, of making mistakes. And then there's something about overcoming those challenges and the mistakes and figuring out how to lose yourself in the match. The dancing or just movement is what it needs to be human. That learning process, so that's what I want to do with the almost as a fun side thing with the Boston Dynamics robots, is to have them learn, see what they figure out, even if they make mistakes. I want to let Spot make mistakes, and in so doing discover what it means to be alive, discover beauty, because I think that's the essential aspect of mistakes. Boston Dynamics folks want Spot to be perfect, because they don't want Spot to ever make mistakes, because they want to operate correctly, very safe and so on. For me, if you construct the environment, if you construct a safe space for robots and allow them to make mistakes, something beautiful might be discovered. But that requires a lot of brain power. So Spot is going to be dumb, and I'm going to give it a brain. So first make it see. Currently it can't see, vision. It has to understand its environment, it has to see all the humans, but then also has to be able to learn about its movement, learn how to use its body to communicate with others, all those kinds of things that dogs know how to do well, humans know how to do somewhat well. I think that's a beautiful challenge, but first you have to allow the robot to make mistakes.
Well, I think your objective is laudable, but you're going to realize that the Boston Dynamics folks are right the first time Spot poops on your rug.
I hear the same thing about kids and so on.
Yes.
I still want to have kids.
No, you should. It's a great experience. So let me step back into what you said in a couple of different places. One, I've always believed that the missing element in robotics and artificial intelligence is a proper development. Right? It is no accident. It is no mere coincidence that human beings are the most dominant species on planet Earth and that we have the longest childhoods of any creature on Earth by far. Right? Development is the key to the flexibility, and so the capability of a human at adulthood is the mirror image, it's the flip side of our helplessness at birth. So I'll be very interested to see what happens in your robot project if you do not end up reinventing childhood for robots, which of course is foreshadowed in 2001 quite brilliantly. But I also want to point out, you can see this issue of your conscious mind becoming a spectator very well if you compare tennis to table tennis. Right? If you watch a tennis game, you could imagine imagine players are highly conscious of their play. You cannot imagine that if you've ever played ping pong decent. A volley in ping pong is so fast that your conscious mind would have, if your reactions had to go through your conscious mind, you wouldn't be able to play. So you can detect that your conscious mind, while very much present, isn't there. And you can also detect where consciousness does usefully intrude. If you go up against an opponent in table tennis that knows a trick that you don't know how to respond to, you will suddenly detect that something about your game is not effective. And you will start thinking about what might, how do you position yourself so that move that puts the ball just in that corner of the table or something like that doesn't catch you off guard. And this, I believe, is, we highly conscious folks, those of us who try to think through things very deliberately and carefully, mistake consciousness for like the highest kind of thinking. And I really think that this is an error. Consciousness is an intermediate level of thinking. What it does is it allows you, it's basically like uncompiled code. It doesn't run very fast. It is capable of being adapted to new circumstances. But once the code is roughed in, right, it gets driven into the unconscious layer and you become highly effective at whatever it is. And from that point, your conscious mind basically remains there to detect things that aren't anticipated by the code you've already written. And so I don't exactly know how one would establish this, how one would demonstrate it, but it must be the case that the human mind contains sandboxes in which things are tested, right? Maybe you can build a piece of code and run it in parallel next to your active code so you can see how it would have done comparatively. But there's got to be some way of writing new code and then swapping it in. And frankly, I think this has a lot to do with things like sleep cycles. Very often, when I get good at something, I often don't get better at it while I'm doing it. I get better at it when I'm not doing it, especially if there's time to sleep and think on it. There's some sort of, new program swapping into old program phenomenon, which, would be a lot easier to see in a machine. It's going to be hard to the wetware.
It is true, because somebody that played tennis for many years, I do still think the highest form of excellence in tennis is when the conscious mind is a spectator. So the compiled code is the highest form of being human, and then the consciousness is just some specific compiler. Is there Borland C++ compiler? You could just have different kind of compilers. Ultimately, the thing by which we measure the power of life, the intelligence of life, is the compiled code. And you can probably do that calculation in all kinds of ways.
Yeah, I'm not saying that tennis is played consciously and table tennis isn't. I'm saying that because tennis is slowed down by the space on the court, you could imagine that it was your conscious mind playing. But when you shrink the court down, it becomes obvious that your conscious mind is just present rather than knowing where to put the ball. And weirdly for me, I would say this probably isn't true in a podcast situation, but if I had to give a presentation, especially if I have not overly prepared, I often find the same phenomenon when I'm giving the presentation. My conscious mind is there watching some other part of me present, which is a little jarring, I would say.
Well, that means you've gotten good at it. Not let the conscious mind get in the way of the flow of words.
Yeah, that's the sensation.
And that's the highest form of podcasting too. That's why I have. That's what it looks like when a podcaster is really in the pocket, like Joe Rogan, just having fun and just losing himself. And that's something I aspire to as well, just losing yourself in conversation. Somebody that has a lot of anxiety to people. I'm scared before you showed up. I'm scared now. There's just anxiety. It's a giant mess. It's hard to lose yourself. It's hard to just get out of it.
Actually, trust is a big component of that. Your conscious mind retains control and very uncertain. But when you do get into that zone when you're speaking, I realize it's different for you with English as a second language, although maybe you present in Russian and
that way because I have a much louder voice that's constantly yelling in my head at, why the hell did you say that? There's a very self-critical voice that's much louder. I'm very, maybe I need to deal with that voice, but it's been like, what that, what is it called, like a megaphone, just screaming, so I can't hear
Oh,
my
no.
voice that says, good job, you said that thing really nicely, so I'm kind of focused right now on the megaphone person in the audience versus the positive. That's definitely something to think about. It's been productive, but you know, the place where I find gratitude and beauty and appreciation of life is in the quiet moments when I don't talk. When I listen to the world around me, when I listen to others, when I talk, I'm extremely self-critical in my mind. When I produce anything out into the world that originated with me, like any kind of creation, extremely self-critical. It's good for productivity, for like always striving to improve and so on. It might be bad for for like just appreciating the things you created. I'm a little bit with Marvin Minsky on this, where he says the key to a productive life is to hate everything you've ever done in the past.
I didn't know he said that. I must say I resonate with that. And, you know, I unfortunately, my life currently has me putting a lot of stuff into the world, and I effectively, almost none of it. I can't stand it.
Yeah, what do you make of that? I don't know. I just yesterday read Metamorphosis by Kafka. We read Metamorphosis by Kafka, where he turns into a giant bug because of the stress that the world puts on him. His parents put on him to succeed. And, you know, I think you have to find the balance. Because if you allow the self-critical voice to become too heavy, the burden of the world, the pressure that the world puts on you to be the best version of yourself and so on, to strive, then you become a bug. That's a big problem. and then the world turns against you because you're a bug. You become some kind of caricature of yourself. I don't know. You become the worst version of yourself, and then thereby end up destroying yourself, and then the world moves on. That's the story.
It's a lovely story. I do think this is one of these places, and frankly, you could map this onto all of modern human experience, but this is one of these places where our ancestral programming does not serve our modern selves. So I used to talk to students about the question of dwelling on things. You know, dwelling on things is famously understood to be bad. And it can't possibly be bad. It wouldn't exist. The tendency toward it wouldn't exist if it was bad. So what is bad is dwelling on things past the point of utility. And, you know, that's obviously easier to say than to operationalize. But if you realize that your dwelling is the key, in fact, to upgrading your program for future well-being, and that there's a point, you know, presumably from diminishing returns, if not counterproductivity, there's a point at which you should stop because that is what is in your best interest, then knowing that you're looking for that point is useful, right? This is the point at which it is no longer useful for me to dwell on this error I have made, right? That's what you're looking for. And it also gives you license, right? If some part of you feels like it you know, is punishing you rather than searching, then that also has a point at which it's no longer valuable, and there's some liberty in realizing, yep, even the part of me that was punishing me knows it's time to stop.
So if we map that onto compiled code discussion, as a computer science person, I find that very compelling. You know, there's when you compile code, you get warnings sometimes. And usually, if you're a good software engineer, you're going to make sure there's no, you treat warnings as errors. So you make sure that the compilation produces no warnings. But at a certain point, when you have a large enough system, you just let the warnings go. It's fine. Like, I don't know where that warning came from, but, it's just, ultimately you need to compile the code and run with it, and hope nothing terrible happens.
Well, I think what you will find, and believe me, I think what you're talking about with respect to robots and learning is going to end up having to go to a deep developmental stage, helplessness that evolves into hypercompetence and all of that. But I notice that I live by something that I, for lack of a better descriptor, call the theory of close calls. And the theory of close calls says that people typically miscategorize the events in their life where something almost went wrong. And, for example, I have a friend who, I was walking down the street with my college friends, and one of my friends stepped into the street thinking it was clear and was nearly hit by a car going 45 miles an hour. Would have been an absolute disaster, might have killed her, certainly would have permanently injured her. But she didn't, car didn't touch her, right? And you could walk away from that and think nothing of it because, well, what is there to think? Nothing happened. Or you could think, well, what is the difference between what did happen and my death? The difference is luck. I never want that to be true, right? I never want the difference between what did happen and my death to be luck. Therefore, I should count this as very close to death. And I should prioritize coding so it doesn't happen again at a very high level. So anyway, my basic point is the accidents and disasters and misfortune describe a distribution that tells you what's really likely to get you in the end. And so, personally, you can use them to figure out where the dangers are so that you can afford to take great risks because you have a really good sense of how they're going to go wrong. But I would also point out civilization has this problem. Civilization is now producing these events that are major disasters, but they're not existential scale yet, right? They're very serious errors that we can see. And I would argue that the pattern is you discover that we are involved in some industrial process at the point it has gone wrong, right? So I'm now always asking the question, okay, in light of the Fukushima triple meltdown, the financial collapse of 2008, the Deepwater Horizon blowout, COVID-19 and its probable origins in the Wuhan lab, what processes do I not know the name of yet that I will discover at the point that some gigantic accident has happened? And can we talk about the wisdom or lack thereof of engaging in that process before the accident, right? That's what a wise civilization would be doing, and yet we don't.
I just want to mention something that happened a couple of days ago. I don't know if you know who J.B. Straubel is. He's the co-founder of Tesla, CTO of Tesla for many, many years. His wife just died. She was riding a bicycle. And in that same thin line between death and life that many of us have been in, where you walk into an intersection and there's this close call. Every once in a while, you get the short straw. I wonder how much of our own individual lives and the entirety of the human civilization rests on this little roll of the dice.
Well, this is sort of my point about the close calls, is that there's a level at which we can't control them, right? The gigantic asteroid that comes from deep space that you don't have time to do anything about. There's not a lot we can do to hedge that out, or at least not short term. But there are lots of other things. Obviously, the financial collapse of 2008 didn't break down the entire world economy. It threatened to, but a Herculean effort managed to pull us back from the brink. The triple meltdown at Fukushima was awful, but every one of the 7 fuel pools held. There wasn't a major fire that made it impossible to manage the disaster going forward. We got lucky. We can say the same thing about the blowout at the Deepwater Horizon, where a hole in the ocean floor large enough that we couldn't have plugged it could have opened up. All of these things could have been much, much worse, right? And I think we can say the same thing about COVID. As terrible as it is, and I cannot say for sure that it came from the Wuhan lab, but there's a strong likelihood that it did. And it also could be much, much worse. So in each of these cases, something is telling us we have a process that is unfolding that keeps creating risks where it is luck that is the difference between us and some scale of disaster unimaginable. And that wisdom, you can be highly intelligent and cause these disasters. To be wise is to stop causing them, right? And that would require a process of restraint a process that I don't see a lot of evidence of yet. So I think we have to generate it, and somehow at the moment we don't have a political structure that would be capable of taking a protective algorithm and actually deploying it, right? Because it would have important economic consequences, and so it would almost certainly be shot down. But we can obviously also say, we paid a huge price for all of the disasters that I've mentioned, and we have to factor that into the equation. Something can be very productive short term and very destructive long term.
And also the question is how many disasters we avoided because of the ingenuity of humans or just the integrity and character of humans. That's sort of an open question. We may be more intelligent than lucky. That's the hope. Because the optimistic message here that you're getting at is maybe the process that maybe we can overcome luck with ingenuity. Meaning, I guess you're suggesting the process is we should be listing all the ways that human civilization can destroy itself, assigning likelihood to it, and thinking through how can we avoid that, and being very honest with the data out there about the close calls, and using those close calls to then create sort of mechanisms by which we minimize the probability of those close calls. And just being honest and transparent with the data that's out there.
Well, I think we need to do a couple things for it to work. So I've been an advocate for the idea that sustainability is actually, it's difficult to operationalize, but it is an objective that we have to meet if we're to be around long term. And I realize that we also need to have reversibility of all of our processes, because processes very frequently when they start do not appear dangerous, and then when they scale, they become very dangerous. So for example, if you imagine the first internal combustion engine in a vehicle driving down the street, and you imagine somebody running after them saying, hey, if you do enough of that, you're going to alter the atmosphere and it's going to change the temperature of the planet, it's preposterous, right? Why would you stop the person who's invented this marvelous new contraption? But of course, eventually you do get to the place where you're doing enough of this, you do start changing the temperature of the planet. So if we built the capacity, if we basically said, look, you can't involve yourself in any process that you couldn't reverse if you had to, then progress would be slowed, but our safety would go up dramatically. And I think in some sense, if we are to be around long term, we have to begin thinking that way. We're just involved in too many very dangerous processes.
So let's talk about one of the things that, if not threatened human civilization, certainly hurt it at a deep level, which is COVID-19. What % probability would you currently place on the hypothesis that COVID-19 leaked from the Wuhan Institute of Virology?
So I maintain a flow chart of all the possible explanations, and it doesn't break down exactly that way. The likelihood that it emerged from a lab is very, very high. If it emerged from a lab, the likelihood that the lab was the Wuhan Institute is very, very high. There are multiple different kinds of evidence that point to the lab, and there is literally no evidence that points to nature. Either the evidence points nowhere or it points to the lab, and the lab could mean any lab, but geographically, obviously, the labs in Wuhan are the most likely, and the lab that was most directly involved with research on viruses that look like COVID, that look like SARS-CoV-2, is obviously the place that one would start. But I would say the likelihood that this virus came from a lab is well above 95%. We can talk about the question of could a virus have been brought into the lab and escaped from there without being modified? That's also possible, but it doesn't explain any of the anomalies in the genome of SARS-CoV-2. Could it have been delivered from another lab? Could Wuhan be a distraction in order that we would connect the dots in the wrong way? That's conceivable. I currently have that below 1% on my flowchart, but I
That's
think
a very dark thought that somebody would do that almost as a a political attack on China?
Well, it depends. I don't even think that's one possibility. Sometimes when Eric and I talk about these issues, we will generate a scenario just to prove that something could live in that space, right? It's a placeholder for whatever may actually have happened. And so it doesn't have to have been an attack on China. That's certainly one possibility. But I would point out, if you can predict the future in some unusual way, better than others, you can print money, right? That's what markets that allow you to bet for or against virtually any sector allow you to do. So you can imagine a simply amoral person or entity generating a pandemic, attempting to cover their tracks because it would allow them to bet against things like, cruise ships, air travel, whatever it is, and bet in favor of, sanitizing gel and whatever else you would do. So, am I saying that I think somebody did that? No, I really don't think it happened. We've seen zero evidence that this was intentionally released. However, were it to have been intentionally released by somebody who did not know, did not want it known where it had come from, releasing it into Wuhan would be one way to cover their tracks. So we have to leave the possibility formally open, but acknowledge there's no evidence. So,
And the probability, therefore, is low. I tend to believe, maybe this is the optimistic nature that I have, that people who are competent enough to do the kind of thing we just described are not going to do that, because it requires a certain kind of, I don't want to use the word evil, but whatever word you want to use to describe the kind of disregard for human life required to do that. You're just that's just not going to be coupled with competence. I feel like there's a trade-off chart where competence on one axis and evils on the other, and the more evil you become, the crappier you are at doing great engineering scientific work required to deliver weapons of different kinds, whether it's bioweapons or nuclear weapons, all those kinds of things. That seems to be the lessons I take from history, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's what's going to be happening in the future. But to stick on the lab leak idea, because the flowchart is probably huge here, because there's a lot of fascinating possibilities. One question I want to ask is, what would evidence from natural origins look like? So one piece of evidence from natural origins is that it has happened in the past, that viruses have jumped.
oh, they do jump.
So like that's one, like that's possible to have happened, so that's a sort of like a historical evidence, like, okay, well, it's possible that it happened.
It's not evidence of the kind you think it is. It's a justification for a presumption. Right? So the presumption upon discovering a new virus circulating is certainly that it came from nature, right? The problem is the presumption evaporates in the face of evidence, or at least it logically should. And it didn't in this case. It was maintained by people who privately in their emails acknowledged that they had grave doubts about the natural origin of this virus.
Is there some other piece of evidence that we could look for and see that would say, this increases the probability that it's natural origins?
Yeah, in fact, there is evidence. I always worry that somebody is going to make up some evidence in order to reverse the flow. Well, let's say
There's a lot of incentive for that, actually.
There's a huge amount of incentive. On the other hand, why didn't the powers that be, the powers that lied to us about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, why didn't they ever fake weapons of mass destruction in Iraq? Whatever force it is, I hope that force is here too, and so whatever evidence we find is real.
It's the competence thing I'm talking about, but okay, go ahead, sorry.
Well, we can get back to that, but
Yeah.
I would say, that the giant piece of evidence that will shift the probabilities in the other direction is the discovery of either a human population in which the virus circulated prior to showing up in Wuhan that would explain where the virus learned all of the tricks that it knew instantly upon spreading from Wuhan. So that would do it, or an animal population in which an ancestor epidemic can be found in which the virus learned this before jumping to humans. But I point out in that second case, you would certainly expect to see a great deal of evolution in the early epidemic, which we don't see. So there almost has to be a human population somewhere else that had the virus circulating, or an ancestor of the virus that we first saw in Wuhan circulating.
Yeah?
It has to have gotten very sophisticated in that prior epidemic.
I really can't hear you.
In Wuhan, in order to explain the total lack of evolution and extremely effective virus that emerged at the end of 2019.
So you don't believe in the magic of evolution to spring up with all the tricks already there? Like everybody who doesn't have the tricks, they die quickly. And then you just have this beautiful virus that comes in with a spike protein and the through mutation and selection, just do, like the ones that succeed and succeed big are the ones that are going to just spring into life with the tricks.
Well, no. That's called a hopeful monster, and hopeful monsters don't work. The job of becoming a new pandemic virus is too difficult. It involves two very difficult steps, and they both have to work. One is the ability to infect a person and spread in their tissues sufficient to make an infection, and the other is to jump between individuals at a sufficient rate that it doesn't go extinct for one reason or another. Those are both very difficult jobs. They require, as you described, selection. And the point is, selection would leave a mark. We would see evidence that it was
In
taking
animals or
place.
humans, we would see
Both, right?
and we see this evolutionary trace of the virus gathering the tricks out.
Yeah, you would see the virus, you would see the clumsy virus get better and better. And yes, I am a full believer in the power of that process. In fact, I believe it. What I know from studying the process is that it is much more powerful than most people imagine. That what we teach in the Evolution 101 textbook is too clumsy a process to do what we see it doing, and that actually people should increase their expectation of the rapidity with which that process can produce just jaw-dropping adaptations. That said, we just don't see evidence that it happened here, which doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but it means, in spite of immense pressure to find it somewhere, there's been no hint, which probably means it took place inside of a laboratory.
So inside the laboratory, gain-of-function research on viruses, and I believe most of that kind of research is doing this exact thing that you're referring to, which is accelerated evolution. And just watching evolution do its thing on a bunch of viruses and seeing what kind of tricks get developed. The other method is engineering viruses. So manually adding on the tricks. Which do you think we should be thinking about here?
So, mind you, I learned what I know in the aftermath of this pandemic emerging. I started studying the question, and I would say, based on the content of the genome and other evidence in publications from the various labs that were involved in generating this technology, a couple of things seem likely. This SARS-CoV-2 does not appear to be entirely the result of either a splicing process or serial passaging. It appears to have both things in its past, or it's at least highly likely that it does. So, for example, the furin cleavage site looks very much like it was added in to the virus, and it was known that that would increase its infectivity in humans and increase its tropism. The virus appears to be excellent at spreading in humans and minks and ferrets. Now, minks and ferrets are very closely related to each other, and ferrets are very likely to have been used in a serial passage experiment. The reason being that they have an ACE2 receptor that looks very much like the human ACE2 receptor. And so, were you going to passage the virus or its ancestor through an animal in order to increase its infectivity in humans, which would have been necessary, ferrets would have been very likely. It is also quite likely that humanized mice were utilized, and it is possible that human airway tissue was utilized. I think it is vital that we find out what the protocols were. If this came from the Wuhan Institute, we need to know it. We need to know what the protocols were exactly, because they will actually give us some tools that would be useful in fighting SARS-CoV-2 and hopefully driving it to extinction, which ought to be our priority. It's a priority that is not apparent from our behavior, but it really is it should be our objective. If we understood where our interests lie, we would be much more focused on it. But those protocols would tell us a great deal. If it wasn't the Wuhan Institute, we need to know that. If it was nature, we need to know that. And if it was some other laboratory, we need to figure out who, what, and where, so that we can determine what we can determine about what was done.
You're opening up my mind about why we should investigate, why we should know the truth of the origins of this virus. So for me personally, let me just tell the story of my own kind of journey. When I first started looking into the lab leak hypothesis, what became terrifying to me and important to understand and obvious is the sort of like Sam Harris way of the hell are we not freaking out about this? And COVID-19 is not even that deadly relative to the possible future viruses. It's the way, I disagree with Sam on this, but he thinks about this way about AGI as well, about artificial intelligence. It's a different discussion, I think, but with viruses, it seems like something that could happen on the scale of years, maybe a few decades. AGI is a little bit farther off for me, but it seemed, the terrifying thing seemed obvious that this will happen very soon for a much deadlier virus as we get better and better at both engineering viruses and doing this kind of evolutionary driven research, gain of function research. Okay, but then you started speaking out about this as well, but also started to say, no, we should hurry up and figure out the origins now because it will help us figure out how to actually respond to this particular virus, how to treat this particular virus, what is in terms of vaccines, in terms of antiviral drugs, in terms of just all the number of responses we should have. Okay, I still am much more freaking out about the future. Maybe you can break that apart a little bit. Which are you most focused on now? Which are you most freaking out about now in terms of the importance of figuring out the origins of this virus?
I am most freaking out about both of them because they're both really important, and we can put bounds on this. Let me say first, this is a perfect test case for the theory of close calls, because as much as COVID is a disaster, it is also a close call from which we can learn much. You are absolutely right. If we keep playing this game in the lab, if we are not, especially if we do it under pressure, and when we are told that a virus is going to leap from nature any day, and that the more we know, the better we'll be able to fight it, we're going to create the disaster all the sooner. So yes, that should be an absolute focus. The fact that there were people saying that this was dangerous back in 2015 ought to tell us something. The fact that the system bypassed a ban and offshored the work to China ought to tell us this is not a Chinese failure. This is a failure of something larger and harder to see. But I also think that there's a clock ticking with respect to SARS-CoV-2 and COVID, the disease that it creates. And that has to do with whether or not we are stuck with it permanently. So if you think about the cost to humanity of being stuck with influenza, it's an immense cost year after year. And we just stop thinking about it because it's there. Some years you get the flu, most years you don't. Maybe you get the vaccine to prevent it. Maybe the vaccine isn't particularly well targeted. But imagine just simply doubling that cost. Imagine we get stuck with SARS-CoV-2 and its descendants going forward, and that it just settles in and becomes a fact of modern human life. That would be a disaster, right? The number of people we will ultimately lose is incalculable. The amount of suffering that will be caused is incalculable. The loss of well-being and wealth, incalculable. So that ought to be a very high priority, driving this extinct before it becomes permanent. And the ability to drive it extinct goes down the longer we delay effective responses. To the extent that we let it have this very large canvas, large numbers of people who have the disease, in which mutation and selection can result in adaptation that we will not be able to counter, the greater its ability to figure out features of our immune system and use them to its advantage. So I'm feeling the pressure of driving it extinct. I believe we could have driven it extinct 6 months ago, and we didn't do it because of very mundane concerns among a small number of people. And I'm not alleging that they were brazen about, or that they were callous about deaths that would be caused. I have the sense that they were working from a kind of autopilot in which you know, let's say you're in some kind of corporation, a pharmaceutical corporation, you have a portfolio of therapies that in the context of a pandemic might be very lucrative. Those therapies have competitors. You of course want to position your product so that it succeeds and the competitors don't. And lo and behold, at some point, through means that I think those of us on the outside can't really intuit, you end up saying things about competing therapies that work better and much more safely than the ones you're selling that aren't true and do cause people to die in large numbers. But it's some kind of autopilot, at least part of it is.
So there's a complicated coupling of the autopilot of institutions, companies, governments, and then there's also the geopolitical game theory thing going on where you want to keep secrets. It's the Chernobyl thing where if you messed up, there's a big incentive, I think, to hide the fact that you messed up. So how do we fix this? And what's more important to fix? The autopilot, which is the response that we often criticize about our institutions, especially the leaders in those institutions, Anthony Fauci and so on, as some of the members of the scientific community. And the second part is the game with China of hiding the information in terms of on the fight between nations.
Well, in our live streams on Dark Horse, Heather and I have been talking from the beginning about the fact that although, yes, what happens began in China, it very much looks like a failure of the international scientific community. That's frightening, but it's also hopeful in the sense that actually if we did the right thing now, we're not navigating a puzzle about Chinese responsibility. We're navigating a question of collective responsibility for something that has been terribly costly to all of us. So that's not a very happy process. But as you point out, what's at stake is in large measure, at the very least, the strong possibility this will happen again, and that at some point it will be far worse. So, just as a person that does not learn the lessons of their own errors doesn't get smarter and they remain in danger, we collectively, humanity, has to say, well, there sure is a lot of evidence that suggests that this is a self-inflicted wound. When you have done something that has caused a massive self-inflicted wound, it makes sense to dwell on it exactly to the point that you have learned the lesson that makes it very, very unlikely that something similar will happen again.
I think this is a good place to kind of ask you to do almost like a thought experiment, or to steelman the argument against the lab leak hypothesis. So if you were to argue, you said 95% chance that the virus leaked from a lab. There's a bunch of ways that I think you could argue that even talking about it is bad for the world. So if I just to put something on the table, is to say that one, it would be racism versus Chinese people. That talking about that it leaked from a lab, there's a kind of immediate kind of blame, and it can spiral down into this idea that somehow the people are responsible for the virus and this kind of thing. Is it possible for you to come up with other steelman arguments against talking or against the possibility of the lab leak hypothesis?
Well, so I think steel manning is a tool that is extremely valuable, but it's also possible to abuse it. I think that you can only steel man a good faith argument. And the problem is is we now know that we have not been engaged in opponents who were wielding good faith arguments, because privately their emails reflect their own doubts. And what they were doing publicly was actually a punishment, a public punishment for those of us who spoke up, with, I think, the purpose of either backing us down or, more likely, warning others not to engage in the same kind of behavior. And obviously for people like you and me who regard science as our likely best hope for navigating difficult waters, shutting down people who are using those tools honorably is itself dishonorable. So I don't feel that there's anything to steel man. And I also think that, immediately at the point that the world suddenly, with no new evidence on the table, switched gears with respect to the lab leak, at the point that Nicholas Wade published his article, and suddenly the world was going to admit that this was at least a possibility, if not a likelihood, we got to see something of the rationalization process that had taken place inside the institutional world, and it very definitely involved the claim that what was being avoided was the targeting of Chinese scientists. And my point would be, I don't want to see the targeting of anyone. I don't want to see racism of any kind. On the other hand, once you create license to lie in order to protect individuals when the world has a stake in knowing what happened, then it is inevitable that that process, that license to lie, will be used by the thing that captures institutions for its own purposes. So my sense is it may be very unfortunate if the story of what happened here can be used against Chinese people. That would be very unfortunate. And as I think I mentioned, Heather and I have taken great pains to point out that this doesn't look like a Chinese failure. It looks like a failure of the international scientific community. So I think it is important to broadcast that message along with the analysis of the evidence. But no matter what happened, we have a right to know. And I frankly do not take the institutional layer at its word that its motivations are honorable and that it was protecting, good-hearted scientists at the expense of the world. That explanation does not add up.
Well, this is a very interesting question about whether it's ever okay to lie to protect the populace. I think both you and I are probably on have the same sense that it's a slippery slope. Even if it's an effective mechanism in the short term, in the long term, it's going to be destructive. This happened with masks. This happened with other things. If you look at just history, pandemics, there's an idea that panic is destructive amongst the populace. So you want to construct a narrative, whether it's a lie or not, to minimize panic. But you're suggesting that almost in all cases, and I think that was the lesson from the pandemic in the early 20th century, that lying creates distrust, and distrust in institutions is ultimately destructive. That's your sense that lying is not okay?
Well, okay. There are obviously places where complete transparency is not a good idea, right? To the extent that you broadcast a technology that allows one individual to hold the world hostage, right? Obviously, you've got something to be navigated. But in general, I don't believe that the scientific system should be lying to us. In the case of this particular lie, the idea that the well-being of Chinese scientists outweighs the well-being of the world is preposterous, right? As you point out, one thing that rests on this question is whether we continue to do this kind of research going forward. And the scientists in question, all of them, American, Chinese, all of them, were pushing